All right. How are you doing, listeners? It's great to have you all back here today with Jeshua and myself. Today, we're going to continue our conversation in courtship. Jeshua and I have got a couple things prepared ahead of time for you, so we're excited to dive into that conversation. But before we do, I just wanted to remind any of you that haven't already to please like or subscribe to our podcast and also to leave us a review. That's super helpful. And not only does it let us know what you want, but it just helps. It's an encouragement to Jeshua and myself. So thank you. Let's get going. Hi,
and welcome to A Feminine Touch God's Way,
where I, Abbey Parrish, and my sister-in-law,
Jeshua Parrish,
discuss God's design for women in the family, the church, the community, the workplace, and so much more.
We are so excited for you to listen in on our stories and experiences as we turn to the Bible and seek God's will for our identity as His daughters,
so that together we can reap the blessings created within the biblical boundaries of womanhood. All right. Morning, Jay.
Good morning, Abby. So good to hear your voice and get to chat with you on this fine rainy day in Georgia.
It's rainy here too.
Yeah, there's like hurricane patterns coming through, so I've never been this close to a hurricane, so it's interesting. I'm like, okay, what do we do? Apparently, some of the gas stations are already out of gas here. I'm like, what? Like, are you guys driving in the rain? I'm so confused. So
that's crazy.
It's a whole new world. Yeah.
What's the name of the hurricane you guys are in? Do you know? Or the path?
You know what? I do not.
Yeah.
I do not know.
I don't know either.
I'm not sure on that.
But I do know that...
I just hear what people say.
I do know that the weather that you guys are experiencing is affecting us here in Illinois, which I think is crazy.
That is actually so crazy how that works.
Yeah.
Like, what? Wild.
Or at least I assume that's what it's from.
I mean, probably. I have no idea.
That's what I've heard other people around me say. I haven't fact-checked it. So if someone else wants to fact-check me that's listening, please do, because now I'm kind of curious. But I assume the weather we're experiencing here, that is the rain, is from the weather they're experiencing in a more extreme way down south.
Makes sense. But yeah, getting into even deeper into courtship, because I feel like we really want to cover our bases and try to get ahead of any questions we might have, because I think, you know, as we've been saying, courting can be confusing what people mean when they say that.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it might be helpful just to like paint some like actual scenarios of what it would look like in a family unit, how to go about courting someone.
Yeah.
And I was curious, like, for you, because obviously you've put some thought into this, like, what would be your ideal courting situation? Like, how would that play out?
Oh, the ideal? The ideal, I would say, is going to be a little situationally dependent on each family, because I think a lot of it depends on the way that the head of the home operates. So in most cases, that's a godly dad. In some cases, let's say dad's not in the picture, that's a godly mom. And then also, like I said last week, seeking the advice from pastors and elders that are in your life. But I would say that just bare bones, the ideal is boy and girl. I'll just use those descriptors. Already know one another and they are friends. And then boy realizes, hey, I actually think that this girl could be an amazing wife. She has character traits in her and qualities that I see that reflect a Proverbs 31 woman in the making, or that is already Proverbs 31 woman-esque. And then boy talks to dad and then says, hey, I just wanted to let you know I really like your daughter, and I wanted to know if I could have your permission to get to know her in an intentional way, if I could court her. That way it lets the dad know, hey, you're not just wanting to get to know her with no end in sight, but you're wanting to get to know his daughter with the idea of, can I marry her, or can I find out if she's suitable for marriage with me? Can I find out if we connect well? Can I find out if we're a good fit? And if we are, I want to marry her. And if we're not, then I'm really glad I found out. I'm really glad I know. I'm really glad I wasn't left wondering. And then guy and girl get to know one another in social settings as like, because they've already been friends. So they're getting to know one another in a continuation of how they've already been getting to know one another. And then guy and girl get to know one another around the family, specifically the family of the daughter, because the dad of the daughter is the one who's kind of steering the ship, as well as, like I said, with wisdom from the mom too. But the dad ultimately is the one responsible. And then also they get to know one another one-on-one. And I think that the one-on-oneness is what really trips people up. And I really do think that that is something that looks different depending on families. So for some families, they might be okay with the dad might be okay with his daughter and that young man coming and spending hours on end with his daughter. For other people, it might be like, hey, I want you to always be in a public place where there's lots of other people. I want there to always be a scheduled activity, or I want there to always be a time limit or something. And I think that you need to work to honor your dad and your mom in whatever standards they set. While also being able to say, hey, Dad, this might not work for my schedule because of these things. Or, hey, Dad, I know you said you want us to go, like being able to have a conversation with your parents while also understanding that ultimately it's their say. And moving forward in a way that shows that you honor them and you care about what they have to say. Because, as we said this last week, this is all training ground for your future marriage and relationship with whomever it is that you marry, whether it be that young man that's pursuing you or someone else who will pursue you later. But yeah, I'd say that is it in the ideals, but I know it's also a pretty rough sketch.
Sure, of course. And like different nuances of that might be different. So
yeah.
One thing you said I thought was interesting, and I don't know, for me, this would not be an ideal. So I'm curious why it's an ideal for you. You said that you would prefer if you were friends with the young man and beforehand, which for me, I don't know. That, like, one of the things I liked about Gabe is like I never viewed him as a friend. Like he came in to my life, not friend zoned, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, why is that a preference for you?
It's a preference for me because I don't want to date a stranger. There are high qualifications that I have for who I want to marry, and some of them can't be known in first interactions or second interactions or even after knowing them for a couple of months. Like there's things about their character, there's things about the way they act in a group with their friends, there's things about their personality that I think is revealed in their family settings as well as in their friendship settings. And for that reason, I think already knowing the guy is important. And I think one benefit that you had with Gabe is even though you didn't know him, you knew me, so you knew my family. So you knew kind of already how our family operated. You knew already how we valued the word of God. You knew already kind of who we were. And by knowing that, you could infer a lot of who Gabe was as a person and as a man. But imagine if you didn't know Gabe at all and you didn't know me at all and you didn't know my family at all. I would say that wouldn't be necessarily the wisest matchup. Now, I think that to a certain extent, that's kind of like online dating is what make me think of is you don't know them and they're removed from your life and you're removed from their life. And I think that there is a way to do that well, but I would say you should still be diligent in making sure that you're not getting into one of the most intimate relationships that you can without knowing as much of them as you can. And I think one of the easiest ways to know a guy or for a guy to know a girl and to get to know as much of them as they can without it being inappropriate is in a friendship setting with other people around. I don't think you should be a one-on-one friend. That's not what I meant when I said it. But just the idea of, yeah, I've seen him interact with other guys, or I've seen him interact in the group, or I've seen how she serves at church, or I've seen how she serves in her place of work, or I've seen how she serves in her family, and just getting to know the person. And I think that it helps the process. Because you're not starting
knowing the family.
Yeah, you're not starting from ground zero.
Right. Yeah. Definitely knowing you guys before getting to know Gabe answered a lot of questions that I had. And like studying even, I was like really acutely aware of how he treated his sisters, how he treated his mother, you know?
Yeah.
I think that can be really telling of a young man.
I would agree. And I think that is, it's just valuable, and you get a lot of information. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why guarding your heart is so important, is because you could be interacting with and rubbing shoulders with somebody who may be your future spouse, which would be super cool, but also there's other people in your friend group and they may be someone else's future spouse. So don't start attributing feelings and thoughts and actions to them that aren't there until pursuit is applied. And even then, you should still be wise to not let your thoughts get the best of you or your emotions get the best of you.
Yeah. I'm curious, have you ever seen this model of courtship play out in people's lives?
Yeah.
Around you?
Yeah. So, let me think. 1, 2, 3. I think there's about 3 or 4 people that I can think of from my church that have gotten married through a way similar to what I just described. And obviously they've done stuff wrong, and they've also done stuff really well. They've done things that I just said, and they've also done other things because that's what worked better for their family. But I think that I know that I've seen it work out well and work out in marriages that are really, really encouraging to see today. And I also know some of them where at first it was just dating, and then later on they're like, oh my gosh, I realize I need to bring in more wisdom. I realize I need to bring in more guidance. And elders from my church stepped in and helped with those things. So there's been examples of them trying to start off well and starting well and continuing well until the consummation of the marriage. And then there's been other ones of, hey, we didn't start off so hot, but we really want to have a relationship that honors the Lord. And how can we do that? And I've seen some that they have the headship from the dad. I've seen some where they have the headship from elders. I've seen some where it's been a mix. So I've seen this work out well, at least about half a dozen times just in my lifetime personally. And then also just from the resources that I've read, there's numerous examples of things working well. But anecdotally for myself, yes.
That's really good to know that we're not describing a magical unicorn.
Oh, no, this is something that's out there. And I think that, honestly, before you started dating Gabe, I remember that was something, not courtship-wise, that you were thinking about, but I remember we were just talking about godly men, and you basically said, well, I don't know if that guy's out there. And I think the truth is that there are people out there like that. There are godly men out there. There are people who desire to court, and they're there. And I encourage people not to give up in in asking for God to fervently bring them, and in fervently asking the Lord to bring those people into your life, and in realizing that there are people out there like that.
Oh, yeah. I remember that conversation because it was like, ironically, we were talking about your younger brother and the way you were describing his behavior towards a young lady at the time. And I was just like, that's crazy to me that he's showing her so much respect and he's talking to her father. Like, he has to wait so long before he even has the potential of going on a date. And I just remember sitting there and I was just like, and the Lord was just like, do you believe that I give good gifts? And I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, why aren't you acting like you could believe that I could give you a man who respects you and is willing to pursue you at his own expense of talking to your dad? Because there's something incredibly flattering, I think, about the difference between a guy who is just like assumes that he can walk into your life and you'll like fall for him completely and totally versus the one that's like, no, I'm going to be uncomfortable and I'm going to talk to your father, your protector. And there's just something, I think, inherently flattering to a woman when a man looks at her, sees so much value in her that he's willing to be uncomfortable and he's willing to be grilled and he's willing to do all these things to protect that relationship with her father for the future, but also to protect her purity, to strengthen those boundaries and that wisdom. Like, I don't know. Any way you look at it, I think that is very attractive. To a young woman.
Yeah. Even if it doesn't end in a marriage with that person. Like, I would say a courtship can be successful even if it ends in a quote unquote like a breakup. Because the whole point of it is being able to guard your heart well and operate in a relationship with this person, with this guy or with this girl, so that at the end of it, there's more unity and not disunity amongst the brothers. And it's the idea of how can I live my life in such a way so that I am honoring the person in front of me, boy or girl, and how can I love them well and treat them the way I would want to be treated.
A common pushback that I've heard with courtship, and I just kind of wanted to address it here. Mm-hmm. One thing that I hear is like, well, you can't really get to know somebody through courtship. And you kind of slightly talked about this with like some boundaries. Maybe it's okay to be one-on-one in a public setting, mm-hmm. but have you ever seen that be an issue before marriage, or have you seen ways to mitigate that fear while still being wise?
Not getting to know them or spending one-on-one time with them?
Well, so the common complaint is that you can't really get to know somebody well enough through courtship before marriage because there's no opportunity to actually get to know them because you're constantly being like surveillanced, essentially, is the idea. Mm-hmm. That is the complaint that I have heard. Yeah. I
honestly think that's laughable. Just the idea that you can't get to know them. I think you know them more. And here's what I mean. Sure, there are other people involved, but that just means there's other sticks poking the bear. And you can really see how angry a bear can get the more times you poke it with the stick. And you have his parents and you have her parents. You might have his step parents. You might have her step parents. And you have the elders of your church involved. And you might have multiple elders involved. And there are so many people involved, and they're able to look at this gem of a relationship several different times from several different angles. And you're able to get to see, okay, not only what do I think of him whenever I'm blinded by these emotions, but what does my dad think of him? What does my brother think of him? What does my sister, my mom, my elders, my mentors, what did these people think of this person that I'm considering? So you're getting multiple opinions because you're seeing that because you're seeing this person not just for who they are around you, but for who they are around other people. And I can tell you for myself personally, like my dad, he has a pretty extensive vetting process that he goes through with any guy that's ever tried to get close to Chloe or me with the idea of courting us. And it's pretty exhaustive. And he knows a lot about them by the time that if they're ever allowed to get to the point where they would date or court Chloe and myself. And like I'm talking about, basically he spends time interviewing them, and he spends time interviewing their friends, and he spends time talking to whoever their pastor is and finding out if they're spiritually immature. And he spends time figuring out like a lot about this young man before they're allowed to get close, I guess, if you will, to myself or my sister. And I'd say I know it's comforting to know. I don't know everything that gets turned up in these conversations. I don't know really any of it, but I do know that they've been vetted really thoroughly. And I do know that because of that, there's a certain level of safety in continuing to move forward and get to know them, because there's not some big blot on their record that's unknown to me or that is unknown to my father. So just the idea of, I think if a dad is doing his due diligence, he needs to really dig into and find out who this young man is. He needs to figure out if whenever this young man is pressed, if he'll fold under pressure. He needs to figure out if he's honest. He needs to figure out if he's a hard worker. He needs to figure out what things he struggles with regards to sin. He needs to figure out how his friends view him. He needs to figure out if this man has got enough strength to lead his daughter. And those are things that that a person who's getting married should know. And I and other women who allow themselves to submit to their dads and their plan, or their parents or their elders in their plan, have a lot of the heavy lifting done for them. And then in addition to that, you can still get to know them in settings with other people. And it's not like one-on-one time is removed. It's just protected. And I can remember whenever you and Gabe were first dating, how you didn't say that you loved one another. And how you're like, man, at first we thought we would just say we don't love one another, not because we don't have feelings and emotions towards one another, but because it was a desire to protect your heart and his own. And I remember something that you guys brought up, and maybe you can extrapolate on this, Jay, is that it made you find more creative ways to show Gabe, or for Gabe to show you that he loved you, because he knew he couldn't just say it. And in a similar way, there are a little bit more boundaries in courtship. There are more hoops you have to jump through, but it just means there's more work and there's more effort. And things that are normally more work are normally better off in the end. Like if you put more effort into something, that's never a bad thing, unless you're putting the effort into something that's bad. And I think we've already established that courtship is a good thing to put effort into. Your future marriage is a good thing to put effort into. I'm not saying whoever you court is the one you're going to marry, but I am saying that you're putting effort into your future relationship. But yeah, Jay, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think the example you brought up in my relationship with the not saying I love you is a great one, because it was like, if that boundary had not been put in place, like that almost like hurdle, that wall, intentionally, it would have been like, why aren't you saying that you love me? And there could be feelings hurt, like, or it could look like, well, why don't you want to spend time with me one-on-one? Or why don't you want to, like, whatever. But because you guys as a couple or as a family said, this is a healthy boundary put in place, well, then knowing that I think he wants to say I love you, but he's not, because he respects this boundary put in place, shows that he can deny himself in a moment for the greater good of respect, which speaks volume of a young man that you're thinking about marrying. And if he can't exercise that self-control, that's really good information to know about your husband or your potential future husband, I wanted to ask you, I kind of want to, this might be a hard question.
All right.
Okay.
Shoot.
So I'll preface with that. But I think some of our listeners may think, oh, your dad has a very extensive vetting process. No wonder you're not in a relationship. Do you think that has any founding? Like, are you worried about that being a reason why you're not in a relationship?
No, I don't think that's the reason.
Okay.
I mean, my dad is an intimidating guy. At least that's what people tell me, and I believe them. But I would say the reason I'm not in a relationship is just because the Lord hasn't ordained it. And I don't mean for that to sound like a cop-out, but I would not peg that on my dad.
Okay.
And honestly, whenever I look at my life and I'm like, I'm still single and I would rather not be. I oftentimes will look into myself and be like, well, how can I, even though I'm not married now, I'm not a wife now, I'm not a mom now, how can I be better prepared for one day when I will be? Because I know God wants me to grow in this season of singleness. I know God doesn't want me to be stagnant, which is something we've already talked about. So how can I make the most of this time? I'm single now for a reason, and maybe the reason is to learn these things that I need to know before I'm married. And maybe it's multifaceted, but I would not say it's because of my dad. That would be, I have never even thought that.
Okay. Well, you understand why I need to ask, because I think it can be easy for somebody who doesn't want to court because they don't want to follow their dad's rules to say, well, obviously it doesn't work. Look here, Yeah.
I think also that it's not as if every potential relationship I've been in where the guy has known that my family is a courting family. Like there's been lots of times where the guy has reached out to me first, or let's say lots of times, a handful of times where the guy has reached out to me first. And sometimes I'm able to shut that, the idea of a relationship down with that person before my dad's even involved. And then I just tell my dad retrospectively. Like that's happened quite a few times. Or it'll be like, and then if the baton does get passed to my dad, then he gets involved. But I wouldn't say that it's the idea or the fear of having to talk to Todd, my dad, that people are concerned about dating me. I'd say most of the people that would have the idea to date me, unless they're intimately involved in my church community, wouldn't even know that talking to my dad is a requirement. So they would have to talk to me first anyway, and then I would redirect them to my dad.
Sure.
But also Dad and I have had conversations of like, it's not as if as soon as a guy talks to, it's not, I think one stereotype that people think of when they're courting is, oh, you're walking in Walmart and a guy there asks for your number and you immediately have to like cover your head with your hoodie and walk away without making any eye contact and then just throw your father's phone number behind your shoulder and hope that he calls him. I think that there's ways to not be awkward. And that's one reason why I think the friendship thing is valuable. It lets the guy know who the girl is and help him see that, yeah, she's worth chasing. because he knows her a little bit already.
I think the friendship thing, I can see where you're coming from, but I think for a lot of people that's incredibly scary, because another thing I hear is, and I've had my friends tell me like, well, I just don't want to ruin our friendship, you know? So, that argument has always hit me so interestingly, because I'm thinking, well, you want to be married. If you get married, that friendship is going to be ruined to a greater or lesser extent, you know? Like, can you speak into that for a second?
I think that we have to realize, and maybe not realize, we have to trust in the sovereignty of God. And once again, that sounds like a cop-out question, but I'm going to further expound and realize that the relationship you have with this person is the one that God wants you to have. Now, obviously, we can, in our sinfulness, make things bad. But at the end of a courtship process, whether it end in a marriage or whether it end in a breakup, that means that both of you are better off because of it, and both of you will have a better relationship with that person than you did before. And it will be honoring to the Lord in that way. And here's kind of what I mean by that. If there's a guy that likes a girl, and they start in on this courtship process and they court for a little while, and then the guy or the girl or both of them realize, hey, this actually isn't going to work out. Okay, before they realized it wasn't going to work out, their friendship was already entering into, or even if they never courted, but they were just friends, there was already special attention that was paid to this girl or special attention that was paid to this boy. And I think a lot of times people are afraid of losing those special feelings and that special place in that person's heart and mind. But the truth is, you won't be treated that way. If a guy is giving you special attention, he won't continue to do that if he winds up dating somebody else, you know? So if you're afraid of losing your friendship that you have with him because you think it's really good right now, it will change once he starts dating another person anyway. It's not something that stays stagnant. Relationships aren't non-moving. They're alive. And it's good to have a friendship with someone. But first of all, I don't think really girls should have relationships with guys or guys should have relationships with girls that are so close that they cling to them and would fear to lose them. Because the truth is, once you start dating someone of the opposite sex, your relationships with other guys and other girls will change. It will regardless. So that relationship might get lost in a way. Like Jeshua, there's friends that you had that were guys in college and you're not really close to them anymore. And some of them you aren't close to anymore because you're married to Gabe. So friendships die and friendships ends and friendships grow. And that's just part of life. And I think one of the reasons people court is because they want to do that well and preserve their relationship with this person as best as they can. But if their reason for saying, hey, I don't want to court someone or I don't want to date someone because we're just too good of friends. I mean, you don't have to date them. But if you're dating them and you're finding out that you like them and your reasoning is, oh, we're just too good of friends, I feel like that's not the best reason.
Yeah. And to give an example of, in college, I had a friend who was a guy and we were still friends when Gabe and I started dating. But as soon as Gabe and I were only dating a couple months and I was like, oh, if Gabe had a friend that was a female, like this friend that I have that's a guy, I don't think I would like that.
Yeah.
And so it was really awkward, but I had to have a conversation with this young man because the nature of that relationship, I don't know why, but he would come to me with all the problems going on in his life and want support. And yeah, friendships, you should seek support. But if you're a guy, you should be seeking that support from other guy friends. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of remember awkwardly being like, well, do you have any other guys you could talk about this with? And it was just, the conversation ended essentially with, hey, you cannot continue to come to me in this manner. I'm in a relationship now and I'm just not okay with that. And so it was just like, he felt uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable. Our relationship, we weren't even friends after that conversation, but I had to make it clear because I was making it clear in a way that I wanted Gabe to make it clear to a young woman if he had a relationship similar to that. Yeah. So I totally relate to that. it can be avoided.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And the relationships you're in will change anyway once you start dating someone.
Oh, yeah.
With that person that you're dating and with the person that you're not. The people that you're not.
Yeah, 100%. So you said that your dad has a list of extensive questions. He practically interviews the young man. I'm curious, are you a part of the questions? Like, are you like, hey, Dad, this is really important for me to know? Or conversely, like, let's say your dad said, hey, I heard Johnny might be interested in you. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, Dad, like, I'm not interested in Johnny.
Yeah.
And so, like, can you, like, do you just give that information to your dad? And then your dad's like, hey, Johnny, like, at this time, I don't think it's going to work out. Like, what does he tell the young man? Does he say straight up, like, what does that even look like? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah. So there are some questions that I've talked about with my dad, whether I'm like outside of actually liking someone, I've brought these things to my dad's attention and been like, hey, Dad, if a young man is ever going to come to you and ask to pursue me, could you please, these are some things that are actually important to me to know. So, and I would list a couple of them, and I wrote them down and actually just texted them to him. So he's got them in his phone archived somewhere. And I know that he brings some of those up whenever he talks to someone. And then other ones he asks for himself. And I think he's better suited to ask pretty much all of the questions in that he has, just because he's a guy and he's been a young man before too. And he's been he can understand more where that guy's coming from. And he can also get them to shoot straight with him. But yeah, there's questions that I have that are just kind of minor things.
And one important thing to what you just said, I feel like your father is going to be a lot more difficult for a young man to fool.
Yeah, for sure.
Than a young woman. So that's an added layer of protection that I hadn't really thought about. So you just said it. So, but continue.
I would say that's one of the benefits of it is the guy just can't work his way around my dad in the same way that he could work his way around me. But like, for example, for myself, I'm trying to think of things I've brought up to my dad's attention. But like, it's important to me to marry someone who can lead me. So I told that to my dad. I'm like, Dad, please figure this out, because if they can't, and I know it won't work out if they can't be a leader to me. Or, Dad, can you please find out for me? And it's not like I have these things and then Dad reports back to me. It's more so Dad finds out these things, and then if the relationship is able to progress any further, I know that at least to a certain extent, the questions I have and the questions that Dad has, or not even all the questions that I have, because Dad might go, well, these aren't pertinent in this moment and they don't need to be asked right now. But basically, I know if I'm green-lighted by my father that he has enough information to let me know that I can move forward as well, at least to a certain point. And it's just kind of an idea of, okay, you're driving down State Street and there's a bunch of stoplights. And if you hit a red light, you wait until it turns green. And if it turns green, you get to move forward. And it's just an idea of, okay, let me just keep hitting these green lights until I eventually hit one that's red and stays red. And I don't have any other option than that's when the relationship would end, or it continues to go green. And that's whenever you are able to marry the person. So it's just this idea of, does this person keep checking these boxes? And not just boxes of questions that I have, but do they pass my dad's standard? And the questions that I have are intended to aid my dad in figuring out, is this a good, godly man? And the standards for me are different than the standards would be for you, or the standards would be for Chloe, or the standards would be for other people in my church. And it's different, like I said, even between me and my sister, just because Chloe and I are different persons. There's some stuff that need to be the same. Like, is he a godly man? Can he lead you? And is he in the word? Like, stuff like that shouldn't change. But there's other things that Chloe and I have different needs. We're not the same person. So we're able to be looked at and viewed a little differently in the person that pursues us.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Another question I wanted to address, because you've mentioned it several times, and I know for me, up until pretty recently, I had never really considered my relationship with an elder, especially since the first time I became a member of a church was when Gabe and I were first married. Mm-hmm. So technically, I didn't even have an elder prior to that. So what role does an elder play in this courting process? Like, is it his job to find you like a potential spouse? Is it his job just to like, for you to go and talk to like, and be like, I'm really struggling with this. How do I do this? Is it his job to like, is it, because we're not talking premarital counseling right now. We're talking about courtship. So that's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Why are we bringing our elders into this conversation? Is it always necessary to bring elders into the courting situation? Or is that something, if your dad's abdicated the role, like, why are we talking about elders?
So we're talking about elders because people are designed to live life in community. And Christians specifically are designed and told, it's not optional, it's commanded to live life in community with your church, the church body of believers. And the leaders of your church are your elders. So that would be your pastor and then other people in the church who have the position of elder. And if you are a member of a church, then you have submitted yourself to your pastor and whoever else are the elders in your church. You've submitted to their authority. And the reason you want to invite them in, and the reason you should, is because you are saying by your membership there, I want to have you lead me. And how can I learn from you? And whenever you are beginning to date someone or court someone or think about marrying another individual, that's a big deal. And you, by choosing to go to a church, have said, I think this church has a lot of spiritual insight and wisdom for me. And I think this church is honoring the Lord well by how they live. And I think my elders are godly men. And I think that they are upholding what Scripture says an elder is supposed to be. And that is something that you, for yourself, should want to emulate. You should want to have a life like that. And I don't mean it in a selfish way, but the elders in my church, I respect them greatly. And I respect their marriages greatly. And that's part of what an elder is supposed to have, is a good marriage. So being able to look at these people and say, I want their wisdom, I want their insight, I want their input, because what they have is good and what they have honors the Lord. And I want that. So how can I set my future marriage up the most for success is by bringing these people in. I would say it's not necessary to have every elder involved. And I would also say that if you have your parents heavily involved, then the role of the elders might be a little less or a little more. It kind of just depends on your family. But the people of your church, if you plan on staying there, and even if you don't, they're the people that you're hoping to live in community with for that moment at least, and if not for a long-term thing for life, and to welcome them into helping you pick a spouse and to welcome them into your future marriage and your future relationships in that way is wise, because by you choosing to go to that church, by you choosing to submit in membership there, you're already saying, I recognize that you have a certain level of authority over my life. And by acknowledging that in who you date or who you don't date, just plainly displays that you're submitted to their authority in a similar way that you're submitted to your dad's authority. So it's a matter of spiritual headship. There's just several layers to it. And I think that in my experience, whenever I've seen relationships pan out in front of me, the ones that have the elders involved have, I wouldn't say that they have a greater success rate, but there's a certain level of, wow, these people are really seeking out as many wise counselors as they can. They're really taking their relationship seriously because they want it to work. They want to honor God. It's not just the idea of, I want to be with this person. Susie really wants to be with Johnny, or Johnny really wants to be with Susie. It's the idea of, how can I really honor God? And by gaining more wise counselors, that does not hurt and it does help. And then you also asked, is it the elder's job to find someone? I would say no. The church is not a dating service. It doesn't have that obligation. But I do think that there's benefit in being able to go to your elder and being able to say, hey, I'm interested in being married and I want to marry someone who's of a similar faith of our church. And that's important to me. Could you help me? I think you have a good relationship. Do you have any godly friends? Do you have any people that you can turn me to? Can you help me network? But that's not necessarily the elder's job. It's not something that they swear an oath to whenever they agree to be an elder. They're agreeing to be a leader and a teacher in your church. But if you go to your elder and say, hey, I would like help in this way, I think that that's something that they could help you do, but it's not a requirement of them.
And that might be a conversation your father has with that elder. Too, on your behalf. One thing that you said, I think, like seeking wise counselors, like I said, I wasn't seeking the counsel of an elder specifically, but I was seeking the counsel of older women that love the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I was definitely like, how did you even find a spouse? Mm-hmm. And one thing that I found super interesting and also somewhat refreshing was a lot of the times that woman who had a marriage I really respected came to me with a list of don't do this. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting. Like they were just, a lot of times it was, I regret doing this, or God's grace covered this. And they came at it through a very humble perspective, which I'm bringing up now because we're spending a lot of time describing an ideal situation. We're describing a mode of pursuing a romantic relationship where there is a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of protection. There's a lot involved in it to safeguard heartbreak. Mm-hmm. But these women, their marriages still worked out, but they still went through heartbreak. Yeah. And they still had areas that they wish they had understood the value of honoring the Lord during the front end of their relationship. Like if I had known it was important to value my purity, if I had known that I could have honored my father, I'd have a better relationship with him. I would have, not walked into marriage with this shame. And I was just completely surprised, first of all, reminded that we are all human, and also reminded that you can go into a relationship with the best of intentions and be blinded to your sin and be blinded to your shortcomings. Yeah. And that does not mean God's grace cannot prevail. So if you're listening to this and you think, my relationship does not reflect what they just described at all, that's because we serve a very good God. Very good God. My relationship doesn't fit this courting process that Abby has described. And in some ways, I wish that it had, because I have things in our marriage now that I look back and I think, wow, God's grace is so good and so sweet. I wish I wouldn't have had to been tempted in that way had I had that protection in place that Abby's describing. So I just wanted to end on that thought and acknowledge that relationships don't always look the same, and that's okay. But our good God and the way that we honor him doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue excellency and we shouldn't pursue wisdom.
Yeah, I agree.
In the way that we go
the
about.
idea of pursuing wisdom, I just want to throw out really quickly some resources that have been a guide to my family.
Sure, absolutely.
So for those of you who like listening to YouTube videos, Vodi Bakum, he has a lot of things to say about courtship. There is a video on YouTube called Courtship for Dummies by Toby Sumpter. It's just really straightforward, a bunch of bullet points of what you should do or shouldn't do in your courting. There's also a sermon series by Paul Washer on courtship. I think if you would just type in courtship and Paul Washer sermon series, it would pop up. It's by Heart Cry Ministries. And then there's also a lot of books. There's Dating versus Courtship. I don't remember who that is by, but that is a good resource that my family uses or has used. And then I don't know if it's possible for our listeners to find it, but my church actually did a sermon series on marriage, and the first few episodes were on dating/courtship, and those were excellent. And that's from Eldred Baptist Church, and it would have been in the August of 2021. And I don't know, maybe we could find a link to that one if it's possible, but that has a lot of excellent resources in it as well. And that's just godly men from my church who were talking on this topic. So yeah, but without further ado, Jay, head us out.
All right, ladies, let us not grow weary of doing good,
for we know that in due time we'll reap a harvest of good reward.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.